Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. It's wonderful being back here in Ottawa, and I want to thank Monique for her introduction. I also want to thank Victor. I'm looking forward to talking with him, answering questions, as well as Tim Barber, Susan Smith, everyone at Canada 2020. I'm also pleased that there are a number of distinguished Canadian leaders here who've taken time out from the vital debate going on in the Parliament to be here, and I thank you as well. I really want to commend this organization because it's playing a vital role in Canadian public life, injecting new ideas, fresh thinking, progressive values, how to solve problems, the role of government, Canada's place in the world. I really think we need more of that, and I'm pleased that Canada 2020 has partnered with the Center for American Progress, which pursues a similar mission in the United States. Now, I've had the great pleasure of visiting Canada many times, both before and after I lost my anonymity. And I used to have a lot of fun when I was anonymous, and I enjoy coming here for so many reasons, but obviously as someone who's had the great privilege of serving in my own government, I know that our two countries have so much in common. No two nations in the world are closer, no border is longer or more peaceful, no one trades more or shares more core values. And although our partnership is already among the deepest and most expansive in the world, I think there is more potential for what we can accomplish together. And that's what I would like to contribute to the debate, the Canada 2020 perspective. I think that the United States and Canada, and also Mexico, can do much more to build a clean energy future together, to stand side by side in the fight against violent extremism around the world, to stand up for those values that place human dignity and human rights at the center of our common endeavors. We are at our best together, and that's always important, but especially at a moment like the one we now find ourselves in. The headlines, after all, are enough to make one's head spin. Chaos and conflict in the Middle East, Russian aggression in Ukraine, unrest in Hong Kong, Ebola in West Africa, a global economy that still is not producing enough growth or shared prosperity. The international order that the United States, Canada, and our allies have worked for generations to build and to defend, for free peoples and free markets, is under pressure from so many quarters. The foundations of our leadership, the broadly shared prosperity and sense of possibility and opportunity at home, are strained as well. It should be no wonder that, at least in my own country, a number of our citizens express uncertainty and even fear about the future. I think this feeling has been building for some time. Certainly as a senator on 9/11, when the state I represented, New York, was attacked, there was an extraordinary sense of fear, insecurity, bewilderment, anger, outrage. Even as I took President Obama's offer to be Secretary of State in 2009, everyone knew it was a time of dizzying changes, the collapse of the global financial markets, two wars that the United States was still waging, but no one could agree on exactly what it all meant. Would economic crisis bring new forms of cooperation or a return to protectionism and discord? Would new technologies do more to help citizens hold leaders accountable or dictators to keep tabs on dissidents? Would rising powers like China, India, Turkey, and Brazil become global problem solvers or global spoilers? Would the emerging influence of non-state actors be defined more by the threats from terrorist networks and criminal cartels or by the contributions of courageous NGOs? Would growing global interdependence bring a new sense of solidarity or new sources of strife? President Obama explained the overarching challenge we faced in his Nobel lecture in December 2009. After World War II, he said, "We led the world in constructing an architecture to keep the peace. And yet a decade into a new century, this old architecture is buckling under the weight of new threats." In my book, Hard Choices, I talk about how we have moved from what you might think of as classical architecture, exemplified by the Parthenon, where it's very clear the lines of authority, the foundation that holds it all up, that was formed after World War II, was a masterpiece of international effort. Today, we have to build a new architecture, but it will probably be more like a Frank Gehry masterpiece than the Parthenon. There are too many moving parts and too many voices that demand to be heard. But revitalizing the traditional alliances that had safeguarded global peace and prosperity for generations is an absolutely essential task, and we have no more important partner than Canada. We need together to construct that architecture, to create a strategy for dealing with this fast-changing world. Certainly in the years that I served as Secretary of State, we began that process to build a global architecture of security and cooperation for the 21st century, reimagining and reinforcing the global order to meet the demands of this increasingly interconnected, interdependent age. Yet even as we worked to breathe new life into our alliances, we knew we had to tap technology and the private sector, as well as the NGOs, to develop new tools to solve global challenges. Partnerships of purpose would be required to defend global norms on everything from nuclear proliferation to human rights to freedom of navigation. And we took decisive action against the threat of violent extremism, certainly most particularly from Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda's syndicate of terror, but we know that that is not the end to that ongoing generational struggle. So I'm very proud of the foundation we began to build during the first 4 years of the Obama administration, but the crises of this second term underscore that the work of shoring up the global order is a long-term commitment that will require all of us, Canadian and American leadership, and not just in government, but in the private sector, in academia, in the non-for-profit sector, as well as with our allies from Europe to Asia. Because our continued commitment will determine whether we build a future of peace, progress, and prosperity in which people everywhere have the opportunity to live up to their own God-given potentials. Canada has been an exceptional partner in this effort. Your nation's courage, generosity, and commitment to universal democratic values are a model and an inspiration. For example, as the Ebola epidemic ravages West Africa, Canadians have sprung into action to help. You've contributed more than $35 million to stop the spread of the virus and help those in need. 2 Canadian mobile medical laboratories with teams of scientists have been deployed to provide rapid diagnostic support and to assist the overworked local healthcare workers. Your government is also working with the World Health Organization to distribute doses of an experimental Ebola vaccine. And while there's, of course, much more that we have to do, our nations are demonstrating what it means when there's a crisis far from our shores and we respond. We had another example of that the first year I was Secretary of State. The SARS epidemic, which found a foothold in Mexico, threatened to spiral out of control, but because the leaders of our country, regardless of party in the United States and regardless of party in Canada and Mexico, had been working for years to create an early warning signal and to stockpile equipment and materials so that when Mexico confronted that SARS epidemic, the training and the preparation that we had done in North America really proved valuable, and they were able to contain it. And I was recently in Mexico and commended the Mexican government and the Mexican healthcare establishment and pointed out this was a joint effort, Canadian, American, and Mexican. I think that it's also a great reminder of how much more we can do as North America. With the changes that are happening in energy, there's so much more we can do to connect our three countries and through us to go even further south. When I was Secretary, Canada and the United States began working together on climate change. We created a new public-private partnership called the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. By 2014, we now have 37 countries and dozens of businesses and organizations working together to reduce methane emissions from oil and gas production and black carbon from diesel fumes and other sources. More than 30% of global warming is attributed to these super pollutants, and putting fewer of them into the atmosphere could help reduce global warming by up to 50% by 2050. We also work together in the Arctic, tackling the problems of black carbon, soot, working on search and rescue. The Arctic will be one of the great frontiers for trade and development in the 21st century, and it could also be one of the great flashpoints for competition and conflict. The United States and Canada are two of the 5 members of the Arctic Council, and we have to lead to ensure that this precious resource that we each have borders on is not damaged irreparably. Another area for greater Canadian-American cooperation. As members of NATO, Canada's contributions to global security are indispensable. More than 40,000 Canadians served in Afghanistan, helping lead our shared mission against al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And Americans honor the service of these brave comrades in arms and grieve with you for the more than 150 Canadians lost in that war. The winding down of our combat mission and the recent inauguration of a new government in Kabul represents a new potential beginning for the people of Afghanistan. So far, it's time for cautious optimism. It would not have been possible without shared sacrifice to have a peaceful transfer of power, to have a leader in Ashraf Ghani who is fluent in the ways of the West and development, and of course, it could not have been possible without Canada and America working together. Now, of course, the fight against violent extremism extends far beyond Afghanistan, and it must be waged with many tools beyond military force. Canada and the United States continue to work together to go after the financing, recruitment, and propaganda of terrorist networks. Canada co-chairs one of the 5 committees of an organization started when I was secretary called the Global Counterterrorism Forum. We established it to better coordinate a truly integrated international response to the challenge posed by terrorism. Because, remarkably, after nearly a decade from 9/11, there was no dedicated international venue to regularly convene key counterterrorism policymakers and practitioners. Now there is. And Canada is especially focused on the important work of building capacity in the Sahel region of North Africa, where we've seen so many threats. Of course, today, the attention of the world is focused on the spread of violent extremism in Iraq and Syria. Whether you call them ISIS or ISIL, I refuse to call them the Islamic State, since they are neither Islamic or a state, but whatever you call them, I think we can agree that the threat is real, first and foremost to the people living in the region, but it goes beyond that. These militants are destabilizing Iraq, targeting religious and ethnic minorities, kidnapping and beheading civilians, persecuting and enslaving women, and unfortunately attracting flocks of foreign fighters, including from Canada and the United States, who have passports from the European countries from which they come, or from our two countries that would enable them to move back and forth. Now, President Obama has laid out a strategy for helping the Iraqi government combat this threat, and a broad coalition of nations has come together to answer that call. Canada initially sent dozens of military advisors to work with the Iraqis, and I know that your parliament is now debating a plan to do even more, including dispatching fighter jets and other material. The United States, I'm sure, will welcome and respect whatever level of support Canada decides is appropriate to help meet this shared challenge. As two close friends, we will not always agree on every issue, but the core values that unite us are unshakable. And as I look around the world and think about 2020 and 2050 and beyond, there's no doubt in my mind that as daunting as some of the challenges we face may be, the opportunities ahead of us are much more significant. Greater connections in our own hemisphere hold such promise. The United States and Canada are working together with a group of open market democracies along the Pacific Rim, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile, to expand responsible trade and economic cooperation. We are also working to link up national and regional electrical grids from northern Canada all the way to the southern tip of Chile, as well as out to the Caribbean. Our friends in the Caribbean pay the highest prices for electricity in the world. It's a combination of geography and oligarchy that has prevented those countries from moving toward energy affordability and independence. Now, one of the reasons I'm optimistic about the future of the Americas is because this hemisphere can really be the anchor for peace, progress, and prosperity for the entire world. If one thinks about the diversity and the democratization and the progress that has been made in North and Central and South America, it is mind-boggling. When it comes to energy, global competitiveness, leadership on the world stage, and so much else, our hemisphere is positioned to thrive, led by North America, if we work together. And everything I've seen and done around the world has convinced me that the future belongs to strong democracies like ours, to those who are the cooperators, the problem solvers, not the naysayers, the dividers and the destroyers. But we have to be willing to make the commitment to demonstrate those values and to reach beyond our own borders. We are uniquely positioned to continue leading the world in the 21st century, just as we did in the 20th. And it is not because of the enduring strength and courage of our militaries or even the resilience of our economies, although both are essential. It goes deeper than that. The things that make us Americans and Canadians Our diverse and open societies, our devotion to human rights and democratic values give us a singular advantage in building a future in which the forces of freedom and cooperation prevail. Will we continue to have threats and feel distress as we watch on our televisions what's happening because of division, dictatorship, and destruction? Yes, we will. But the world is freer and more prosperous today than it was 50 years ago. The world is better positioned because of technology to make progress together, and there really is no viable alternative than for us to try together and to lead together. As President Obama said the other day, when there's a crisis or a conflict, people around the world who want help with Ebola or terrorism or any other challenge don't call Moscow, they don't call Beijing, they call Ottawa, London, Paris, Tokyo, Washington. They call on the great democracies to rally together, as we always have, for the good of our own people and the good of people everywhere. But our leadership is not a birthright. It is a responsibility that must be earned with both determination and humility by each generation. So I appreciate that organizations like Canada 2020 are contributing to a rich public debate in this country about the work we have to do together in the years ahead. And I'm glad that Canada's leaders are deliberating about the role you should play around the world, and that the alliance between our two nations is as strong as it has ever been. I'm very bullish about our futures. I've been to 112 countries, and I've seen what works and I have seen what doesn't work. And I think democracies right now in our hemisphere and elsewhere are facing lots of challenges. The fascinating election in Brazil is just one example. So much debate about what's the right way to grow economies and further equality of opportunity, the right way to make sure that the ladders of opportunity and mobility are there for the next generation, ensuring that government functions at a high level, earning the trust and respect of the people who vote it in and out of office. These are hard times for democracies because it is a messy business, what we have chosen to do to govern ourselves. But I'm absolutely confident that we will continue to make the right decisions for future generations. And I'm very grateful that as we try to do so to your south, we will have a partner in Canada that continues to do so here as well. Thank you all very much.